Hey folks, and welcome to the Tested Camera Review Corner, where I will be talking about some new cameras I've been playing with. It's been a while since I've touched a new camera. I've had the GH5 for 3 years now, and I've been loving this camera. This is the Panasonic GH5. It shoots 4K, 422, 10-bit, has a stabilized lens, a stabilized sensor I can work with for dual stabilization. So it's really checked a lot of boxes of the kind of work that I've done, a lot of the travel work, which I haven't been doing a lot lately. So as I've been, I guess, kind of rethinking what my hobby is, I'm doing a lot less travel shooting. So what am I doing right here? I'm trying to do a lot more cinematic stuff, short films, little commercial specs, music videos, little things here and there. And I wanted to explore other options, other cameras that might provide more tools. Like I said, this is a great outdoor camera. It's been great for run and gun handheld, but what if I wanted to do something more in the cinematic world? And naturally, you kind of start thinking about full frame cameras. A lot of people use full frame cameras, the DSLR style, mirrorless. They use that to achieve a certain depth of field. But there's tons of other options outside of just that one extra tool set. So I wanted to check out full frames, and I had my eye on this next Panasonic camera. This is the S1H. This came out like last year. Much beefier version of Panasonic's mirrorless camera. It does like up to 6K. It can shoot tons of different frame rates. And again, full frame L mount series. So it would be my entry into the full frame, but it's pretty pricey. It's like $4,000 and not something that I could really just afford at the time. So as I was kind of looking at this, Panasonic just came out of nowhere with this new full frame camera, the Panasonic S5. This is a full frame camera for half the price of the S1H that is actually very comparable to it. Very similar image quality. There's a lot of the more popular formats you use. It doesn't go up to 6K. At the moment, it doesn't do external RAW, but it'll get there apparently by the end of the year. And again, full frame L mount series. So this could actually get me into the ecosystem of the Panasonic, but I wanted to test it out first and see if it was even worth it. Before I ventured out of the ecosystem, I did want to check out these two cameras, and I will get into that shortly. But first, I do want to talk a little bit about sensor sizes. So there are tons of different sensor sizes out there, as you can see, but really I just wanted to focus on the three that I've used or I want to talk about, and that is the Micro Four Thirds, the Super 35, or the Super 35 family of sensor sizes, and then the full frame 35. And there's a lot of 35s in there. It gets a little confusing, but we'll break that down shortly. Let's start with Micro Four Thirds. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the image quality of sensor sizes. Now, Micro Four Thirds would be considered like a small sensor to someone who uses a full frame, especially who has full frame photography, because you can just pack in much more data, much more megapixels, much more pixel density. Like, there are image quality advantages to having a larger sensor. For video, that doesn't, at least for me, that's not as important. Those differences aren't as noticeable in video as it is in photography, where you're blowing up images and printing them and whatnot. If I took this Micro Four Thirds camera out alongside a full frame in the outdoor daylight to shoot some images, you would be hard pressed to find a big difference in the image quality there. It's really about what the camera can do, what the color science is involved with the sensor. There's a lot of other things than just sensor size. So if you're doing video, dig deeper into sensor sizes and what those mean and what else can be achieved with a camera besides sensor sizes. Because there are a lot of camera manufacturers that are just pumping out large sensors, and those sensors might not have the institutional technology that's happened throughout other camera manufacturers throughout the year. So sensor size isn't everything for image quality for video, but it does take into account the crop factor. Now, crop factor is, it changes throughout different sensors. The crop factor all relates to a full frame image. So when the Micro Four Thirds GH5 is a 2x crop factor, that means this 12 millimeter lens will effectively be a 24 on a full frame camera. So you're using the sensor is taking in a little bit less of the image from the lens, and it's pushing it in a bit. So you're kind of cropping in. So you're getting what would be a more zoomed in view. So you can't just throw a 12 millimeter on each full frame in Micro Four Thirds and expect the same results. You'll have a much tighter shot with the Micro Four Thirds. So this 12 to 35 is effectively the same as this 24 to 70 full frame in terms of your composition. Next is the Super 35. This is what my mind kind of works in. I've been using Super 35 for a long time, and even with the GH5, when I want to shoot something a little more cinematic, I'll throw in a Metabones adapter, which is basically an adapter that allows me to use Canon EF lens, but also it optically enlarges that sensor size to make it more like a Super 35 camera. And there's Super 35 kind of runs around a bunch of little variations, like the Academy 35, Super 35, I think APS-C is in that same size range. But basically that gives a 1.5 crop factor, and again, that's how my mind works. When I kind of audition lenses in my mind and I'm looking at a scene, I kind of know what a 24mm will look like in that 1.5 crop. I know about what a 2.8 to a 4 to a 5.6 will look like in terms of depth of field, just because I've been using them for a long time. And chances are you've probably been exposed to that the most. That's what feature films have shot in for years and years and years and years. And of course there's 65mm and large format versions of movies that have come out throughout the years. But for the most part, everything is kind of shot in Super 35, but with the the new Alexa LF, the larger format, red kind of gets deep into full frame. The film industry is slowly kind of moving into the full frame. Full frame's coming for sure in the film industry, but for right now, for the most of the movies you've seen, it's Super 35. And it's a great look. Like like I said, I love using that. I know how to work it, and it does really cinematic images in my opinion. The full frame is where it gets a little bit crazier because these are full frame still cameras that have been used for film. This you get no crop factor, and it also means you get a much more shallow depth of field. Each of these cameras, shooting at this 12 to 35 GH5, 24 to 70, you can't just set these cameras up and get effectively the same composition because of the crop. To get the same shot set up that you're getting in the GH5, if I put this camera here, I would have to do two things to get that same shot. I would need to either zoom the lens in to give me the exact composition, or I have to physically move this camera in because it is wider. And each of those things will affect the depth of field. They will affect it in terms of becoming more shallow. So that's why you see people really gravitating towards these who are like depth of field junkies, who really want to like just blur the heck out of everything except for a razor thin focus pane right in the eye. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's not something I do, but it is a tool that not only you can utilize, but also allows you to work within your exposure triangle a lot, I guess, broader. You can do different things with your lens because you're having more, well, because your sensor size is much bigger, so you're allowing more light, but also being able to control the depth of field from going very, very, very shallow to very, very deep throughout the range of your lens. So there's more options, essentially, when using a full frame. So that's sensor sizes. So now let's look at these two Panasonic cameras that I've been fiddling with. Let's go ahead and roll video of what I shot with these cameras over the last few weeks. I shot a lot with these. I shot like a commercial spec with the S5. I did a music video with both of these cameras using the anamorphic lenses. Shot a short film using anamorphic lenses. And one thing I really noticed was that they cut together really well. Like I said, they're so similar in terms of their sensor. There's so many features kind of match up. Just one is a little less so. But the image together, shot together, cut together, it looks almost identical, which is a really cool thing considering that one is half the price of the other one. I've been using the GH5 and the GH5S as sort of an A cam, B cam situation. One has, the GH5 is a little more stable, has a stabilized sensor. The GH5S does not, but it does better in low light. Each of these cameras I can take individually and do certain jobs, or together I can shoot cross-shot interviews, and I know that they will cut together and the color science and the sensors kind of match, so they will look similar. That's kind of what I could do, if I was to buy an S1H and an S5. Chances are I will not do that. I'll buy maybe one of these to enter into the full frame market. But knowing that that is an option, maybe if rental is down the road, or if there's like a job where we need to do, grab a couple extra cameras, I know that I can mix and match these guys. The colors looked fantastic. The S5, I got about 14 stops at dynamic range. Again, 422 means that I can, 422 10-bit means that I can take this stuff into post and just change the colors like crazy. So if I want to do very specific grading passes, I have that option. Both of these cameras also have the anamorphic option. I've been using these anamorphic PL mount lenses. So this is L mount, but I have an adapter that gives me PL mount, which is what most cinema lenses are, or higher quality cinema lenses. So I've been using these anamorphics, 2x anamorphics, to shoot a bunch of cinematic stuff. And each of these cameras has their options for that. You can't just throw an anamorphic lens onto a regular camera and use it because they're the lenses are different. The lenses are capturing a very strange image, and so you need to de-squeeze that in camera. You do that here through the menus, and then there's also a stabilized version specifically for anamorphic. Because the way the stabilized sensor works, it doesn't really translate perfectly over to anamorphic lenses, and so they actually have a fix for that in there in the menu system. You just say, hey, I'm using anamorphic, adjust your stabilization for that lens, and it does it. And it does it beautifully. I shot handheld music video and a handheld short film using just the in-body, the IBIS in-body stabilization. And obviously these anamorphic lenses don't have stabilized lenses the way these other Panasonics do. So it was just that one point of stabilization, and it worked great. It looked smooth. It was gliding. I used like a 65 handheld, and like just the right amount of sway and movement that I wanted. It's like jitter that I really dislike about handheld, especially handheld mirrorless cameras. And I'm really glad that they brought that tech over. Like that stuff, the stabilization and the color science and the color data rate, which is much more people are doing the 422. I know Sony's coming out with the 422 10-bit. Like that's great. Like I've been turned off on those cameras for so long because of that. I never wanted to shoot S-Log. I never wanted to shoot their log formats because there just wasn't enough data for me to be messing around with. So it's a great trend that people are going towards for the color depth and the bit depth. And it's great to see that Panasonic is taking both the IBIS and the color science kind of over to just upgrade it basically on these S5 and S1H. So yeah, the anamorphic lenses are a great touch, being able to put these on both of these lenses. The S1H does do in external RAW 5.9K. So basically HDMI, full-size HDMI out to like a Ninja, and I can record ProRes RAW. This S5 will do the same at the end of the year, but as of right now, it only does internal up to 4K. Now, I'm not going to go over every single one of the formats. There's a lot of, especially with S1H, there's a lot of recording formats here. You can find this data anywhere you want and kind of choose which camera you want based off of that. I typically shoot in 4K 24, and both these cameras do that just fine, and I also do high frame rate stuff. Now, variable frame rate on the GH5, let me kind of show you what that process was. It was me turning the camera on. I would shoot in 10-bit 422, and when I want to do my like close-up coverage of if I'm doing product stuff, I would jump over to the variable frame rate mode. But to do that, I had to get out of 422. I had to go to 420 8-bit, then use this button that I mapped for variable frame rate, change that, shoot on my coverage, jump back out, change the format back to 422, and continue shooting there. Same thing with the S1H. I have to do a similar thing. Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of a little bit annoying to have to jump out of those formats and bounce around. Like you kind of want a one-button solution to do that. And the S5 kind of does. It has up on the dial up here, has a new option called S&Q, which is slow and quick mode. And you can actually set your variable frame rate there based on your recording mode, and then bounce over to the regular movie mode and get to your old original recording format, which is great. So that now I can just pop over to movie, shoot all the stuff I want to shoot in 24, jump over to slow and quick and shoot my coverage in a reduced format. Really cool feature to have. I'm really glad they included that. The body itself is just super slick. Kind of like the GH5, it's just a little bit sleeker. It looks a little nicer. The S1H is just it's a monster of a camera. I mean, I really love this camera, and I wish I can use this thing more often, especially for cinematic projects, just because of the amount of options it has. But it is a large camera, and especially if you're getting into full frame, your lenses are all going to be a lot bigger. So would I take this on my travel jobs? Like I shot in Cuba for a week straight on the streets in like the sun, holding the GH5 up for 8 hours a day. I don't think I could do that with the S1H. I think it's just a little bit too big. This kit lens is actually a decent size, but I would probably use something more like that in the full frame size. And so, that lens on this camera, handheld, would probably wreck me. The S5 is a good medium because it is a smaller camera like the GH5. It can have that kit lens, or you can have those larger full frame options for some really killer quality. Another big advantage with having the full frames is that you're able to control your exposure triangle a little bit better. I've been shooting a lot with like prosumer cinema lenses, such as like the Rokinon here. This is like a plastic casing, but it's got a nice rolling iris. It opens up to like 1.5, which is crazy. And it looks decent. Like I've used it on tons of projects, and I think it looks great. I think it looks good. But the thing is, when you're using like the GH5 and you're looking for more light, and you can only go up to an ISO of 400 or 800, and then if you use the GH5, you can get to like 2500. You're still not pulling in a whole lot of light to that tiny sensor, and so you're depending on something like the iris to give you a little bit more of exposure. But with prosumer lenses, a lot of times, this is pretty common, is that the image that it produces looks great at a certain range. That isn't always wide open. The 1.5, even though the Rokinons can open up to 1.5, the 1.5 to like 2.8 is kind of soft, and there's a little bit of color fringing. And again, that's not uncommon. That happens in a lot of lenses. A lot of lenses have like a sweet spot. And so being able to jump into the full frame and use the sweet spot of a lens, adjust my exposure in other places, but use the sweet spots of the lenses while also increasing my depth of field, because naturally it's a full frame camera, is great, because I can use lenses that may not be perfect wide open or closed up. And I can still achieve a depth of field that some would call cinematic with a higher number of a T-stop or an f-stop, and still pull in light with that larger sensor, because the larger sensor means I can just grab much more light, and especially with the dual ISO of this S5 and the S1H, which is great. It's another thing they kind of took from the GH5S technology that was happening there with the dual ISO, was basically I can go to 640 as is native, so I get a clean image at 640, and then once I get up to 4000 ISO, the sensor kind of switches over and becomes, all right, now we're using their native 4000 ISO chip, and you'll get a very clean image there, which gives you a lot of room. Like, it's hard to even go back to the GH5 original with only having that one ISO. Again, daylight looks fantastic, but you get a little trickier situations when you're getting into like studio spaces with lower light. So having that dual native ISO, again, opens up the options with that exposure triangle just to be able to work with a much larger tool set. So between that, the 14 stops of dynamic range that the V-Log gives me, the stabilized sensor, taking away all that jitteriness, and then just what you can get with the anamorphic lenses, the anamorphic features, like this camera is, I mean, this is a pretty badass cinema camera. I mean, better than some of the other cameras with cinema cameras in their name. This is much more cinematic in my opinion. That being said, if you are looking for a camera that is, you know, a vlogging camera, I mean, this could be it because you have that front-facing screen, but let's talk about autofocus. Everyone kind of talks about autofocus when it comes to Panasonic and their, I guess, lack of it being great. I haven't used enough of it to really say how nuanced it is or how you can adjust it to make it look better. In my opinion, with the GH5, it was pretty much, I just couldn't trust it. And in the short time I used the S5, both the S5 and the S1H's autofocus, I again wouldn't trust it. I think if you're looking for an autofocus system, you should look elsewhere. There are plenty of other cameras that are doing really great autofocus. I tried the face and the body detect on this numerous times, and I tried a much more harder version where my daughter was swinging with the hat and glasses, and I tried to have this thing follow her, and it didn't do great. I mean, as expected, that's a tough situation, but again, I don't think autofocus is what people are coming to Panasonic for. There's plenty of other good things. Autofocus isn't one of them. So in terms of the L-mount lens, I wish I could speak more about my experience in that ecosystem, but I can't. I haven't used a whole lot of L-mount lenses. I do know that there is something called like the L-mount Alliance between Panasonic, Sigma, and Leica, who are all creating lenses in this ecosystem. So it sounds like you do have some options. I don't think there are as many options as there are in some of the other more popular ecosystems, but with those three brands dedicated to making lenses for the L-mount, I think you'll be okay. I had this rigged up because of the focal flange distance. I was able to rig up a PL mount to attach these PL lenses. So you do have options that kind of move upwards that you can adapt to different lenses. But these lenses that I've been using, these Panasonic Lumix lenses, have looked really great on these cameras. The batteries on all three of these cameras are all, of course, different. But for some reason, the Panasonic S5 has kind of a GH5-like battery in it that works in the GH5. So I can put the S5 into the GH5 and turn it on no problem. I can't go the other way. I can't put my GH5 batteries into the S5 and use that, which is unfortunate because I have a lot of GH5 batteries. But I can go backwards for some reason. There are a lot more technical specs and stuff to go over on these two cameras, but really it's just been about my positive experience using these on all these projects these last few weeks. Like I said, I fell in love with the GH5 when I was doing a lot of travel work, and that camera really just complemented my lifestyle and my work style really well. And now as I'm moving, well, now as I'm kind of stuck inside more, shooting more cinematic experimental shorts and shooting little commercial specs, I'm looking for something that gives me a little bit more of a larger palette of the image to work with. And full frame, not only just full frame kind of do that, open up that triangle, give me more options to work with. But also the S5 just having the ability to, having it be small enough to fit on my like Jib 1 or my small sliders, give me some nice motorized shots. Throw on an anamorphic lens, give it a nice cinematic quality, or just work in that 422 color space, color the heck out of my images, and then soon enough be able to shoot raw with this thing externally. That's a pretty impressive set of things for a $2,000 camera body. I mean, I was going to look at the S1H, and I still might in the future, but at this point, I'm thinking I'm going to be buying the S5 and spending that extra money on lenses and sort of the tools that help me achieve the cinematic quality that this camera can supply. So there you go. It's a whole bunch of new camera stuff. I've overloaded myself. I've been with the GH5 for so long, I got used to just having one camera, and now I have a whole lot of cameras and lenses to play with, and it has been a fun few weeks of playing with these indeed. I do not want to send these back, but thank you, Panasonic, for sending these out on loan that I can take a look at, and we'll see you guys next time on another tested camera review or camera tech video. Goodbye.